The tragic final act, the Bobbie Jo Stinnett case. Bobbie Jo Stinnett was born on December 4, 1981 in Missouri, a young woman with dreams and determination. A proud graduate of Nottoway Holt High School in Graham, she later settled into life running a modest dog breeding business with her husband. At just 23 years old and expecting her child, Bobbie Jo seemed destined for a future full of promise. Yet fate had a cruel twist in store for her. On December 16, 2004, in the quiet town of Skidmore, Missouri, her life was brutally cut short in a manner so shocking it would reverberate across the nation. The seeds of this tragedy were sown long before that fatal December day. Bobbie Jo had forged an unlikely online connection with a woman who went by the alias Darlene Fisher in a rat terrier chat room known as Ratter Chatter. Unbeknownst to many, this digital exchange would soon bridge the gap between two very different lives. Lisa Montgomery, 36 at the time, was an enigmatic figure whose troubled past and desperate desires would soon collide with Bobbie Jo's gentle world. Montgomery, who lived in Melbourne, Kansas, had skillfully cultivated an image of herself that masked a turbulent inner life. Claiming to be pregnant herself, she struck up a conversation with Bobbie Jo, discussing everything from dog shows to the intimacies of pregnancy. Their interaction led to an agreement. The two women would meet in person. Bobbie Jo, who had a litter of puppies for sale, was to show Montgomery her animals, a seemingly innocent arrangement that would soon turn deadly. On the morning of December 16, 2004, Montgomery drove from Melbourne to Skidmore, arriving at Bobbie Jo's home around 12:30 p.m. The day had begun like any other, with Bobbie Jo busy with her business, taking the puppies outside to play. At approximately 2:30 p.m., after a phone call with her mother, Becky Stinnett, who had been anxiously awaiting her arrival, Bobbie Jo's day took a sinister turn. In the hours that followed, Montgomery, armed with a sharp kitchen knife and a white cord concealed in her jacket, struck without warning. Initially, she used the cord to strangle Bobbie Jo until the victim slipped into unconsciousness. Despite the friendly facade of a shared afternoon with the puppies, what unfolded was a calculated act of violence. As Bobbie Jo briefly regained consciousness due to the shock of the knife attack, a desperate struggle ensued. Montgomery, cold and determined, strangled her a second time, ensuring Bobbie Jo's death. In an act so gruesome it defies belief, Montgomery then proceeded to cut the unborn child from Bobbie Jo's womb. In a further display of calculated cruelty, Montgomery extracted the fetus, an 8-month-old baby, and left the scene with it. Driving a short distance from Bobbie Jo's home, she stopped briefly to clamp the umbilical cord and clear the baby's airway. Although the newborn cried out, aside from a cut above the eye, it suffered little physical injury. Montgomery then placed the infant into a car seat, retrieved from her trunk, and drove off, heading toward Topeka, Kansas, with the child in tow. Meanwhile, Bobbie Jo's disappearance did not go unnoticed. When her mother, Becky Harper, received no further calls from her daughter, she walked to Bobbie Jo's home. There, in a scene of unspeakable horror, Becky discovered her daughter lying in a pool of blood, her injuries so severe that even the onlookers could only compare them to a scene where her stomach had exploded. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but all efforts to revive Bobbie Jo were in vain. She was pronounced dead at St. Francis Hospital in Maryville, Missouri, leaving behind a grieving family and a community in shock. In the aftermath of the murder, the investigation quickly turned its focus to Lisa Montgomery. Tracing online communications back to her IP address and connecting her to the scene, law enforcement zeroed in on Montgomery's residence in Melbourne, Kansas. On December 17th, police found her at a farmhouse. A witness later recalled that, on the morning before her arrest, Montgomery had been seen taking the infant, along with her husband and 2 teenage sons, to a local restaurant for breakfast. Kathy Sage, the owner of a nearby cafe, even stated that Montgomery had proudly shown off the baby, presenting the child as her own and even mentioning a name from the Bible, Abigail. During questioning, Montgomery's story unraveled further. She admitted that she had given birth at home, assisted over the phone by friends, and claimed that she had disposed of the placenta in a nearby creek. When pressed, she confessed to the horrifying acts, killing Bobbie Jo Stinnett, abducting the newborn, and attempting to cover up her crime by driving the child to Topeka. DNA tests confirmed that the infant was indeed Bobbie Jo's, and forensic evidence placed Montgomery at the scene. Montgomery's own backstory was one of relentless torment. Born on February 27, 1968, in Melbourne, Kansas, her early life was marred by physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Subjected to repeated assaults by her stepfather and others from the tender age of 11, Montgomery was forced into a world of unspeakable horrors. These early traumas would cast a long shadow over her life, contributing to a fragile mental state marked by psychosis, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Her troubled past, compounded by her mother's alcoholism and other abuse, created a recipe for disaster that would eventually culminate in the chilling crime against Bobbie Jo. Montgomery's life was a litany of failed pregnancies, claims she often made after undergoing a tubal ligation, a procedure she insisted had been forced upon her. These false claims were part of a pattern of deceit designed to secure attention and manipulate those around her. Yet, it was her desperate attempt to produce a baby that she could claim as her own, that led her down the path to committing an act so monstrous that it would forever alter the landscape of American criminal justice. In 2007, after a trial that captured national attention, Lisa Montgomery was found guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, a federal offense given the interstate nature of her crime. Her defense attempted to argue that she suffered from pseudopsoriasis, a mental condition in which a woman falsely believes she is pregnant, among other mental health issues. However, expert testimony and overwhelming evidence contradicted this claim. Montgomery's fluctuating and delusional statements during the trial only served to strengthen the prosecution's case. On October 22, 2007, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and just a few days later, they recommended the death penalty. Judge Gary A. Fenner formally sentenced Montgomery to death on April 4, 2008. Over the following years, her appeals were exhausted, and in a historic decision, Lisa Montgomery became the first female federal prisoner executed in 67 years when she was put to death by lethal injection on January 13, 2021. At the time of her execution, she stood alone on federal death row as the only woman awaiting execution, a grim milestone in the annals of American capital punishment. The brutal murder of Bobbie Jo Stinnett, the twisted path that led to it, and the subsequent legal saga surrounding Lisa Montgomery left an indelible mark on the nation. Bobbie Jo's infant, having miraculously survived the crude and inhumane procedure, was safely recovered by authorities and returned to her father, a small beacon of hope amid the tragedy. The case resonated deeply with the public and became a rallying point for discussions about violence against women, domestic abuse, and the failures of the justice system. Social media erupted with outrage as women and men alike used hashtags such as #Justice, for Bobbie Jo, #Endfemicide, and #NoMoreSilence to express their grief and demand change. Influential celebrities and political leaders, from Hollywood stars to prominent figures in government, weighed in, calling for stricter protections and reforms to ensure that such tragedies would never happen again. In the wake of the case, the Bobbie Jo Stinnett tragedy also spurred a renewed conversation about the use of the federal death penalty, particularly for crimes involving extreme brutality and the exploitation of vulnerable lives. Books, documentaries, and true crime series have since revisited the case, each retelling the story with a focus on its deep-rooted implications for society and justice. The story of Bobbie Jo Stinnett is not merely a chronicle of a life lost too soon. It is a searing indictment of a society that has, for far too long, failed to protect its most vulnerable members. Her tragic death, committed by a woman whose own life was marred by unimaginable abuse, underscores the complex interplay of trauma, mental illness, and systemic failure. As the legal proceedings concluded and Lisa Montgomery's execution marked a grim milestone, the legacy of Bobbie Jo Stinnett continued to fuel activism. Her memory serves as a stark reminder that every victim of gender-based violence carries with them a story of unfulfilled potential and a call to action for deeper societal reform. Until true justice is served and comprehensive protections are in place, the echoes of her tragedy will continue to haunt a nation determined to say, "Never again."